The trilogy. Who would have thought?
Well, how long's this one going to go on for then?
Well, it's booked for 2 hours.
Oh,
It's booked for 2 hours, Dave. So, but welcome
It's
again,
all right. Well,
Dave.
I've got the Island game on record, so
Have you?
I don't need to get back for the start.
So you don't need to rush back then. Well, it's good to see you again, Dave. Anyway,
It's good to
been
be
a
back,
couple of
James.
months. Yeah, it's good to see. What have you been up to over the summer, anyway?
Motorhoming, mainly, James.
Right.
Yeah, a couple of trips out with the new motorhome.
Yeah.
Get to grips with it. Just got back, really, from Holland and Belgium. Got one of the dogs a European passport now, so he's got freedom of movement too.
Did you say you had to go to Ireland to have a vaccination with your dog? Or
No,
something?
Belgium in the end. I was going to take him to Ireland,
Yeah.
but my wife said she wanted to come too and go to Belgium.
Yeah.
She likes chocolate shopping. So
Good place for that, Belgian chocolates.
absolutely
yeah.
good
Yeah.
place for beer shopping too.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
So-
yeah.
So yeah, just back from one of those. Still doing a little bit of consultancy, still talking to an awful lot of younger and newer advisors and people trying to find their way into this. Interestingly, I'm talking to, this week I've had 3 conversations with people who are coming to the end of their time at one of the big academies. I'm not going to say which one, but they want out of that regime.
Regime.
And I think this point that I've been trying to make, that there are 2 sides to this. The professional side, the sort of more institutional product based, what I call the product flogging side. I think people are actually beginning to get that message, and certainly I think people trying to find their way in have got that message, which was one of my aims, really. I want to try and inform people properly about the differences between these 2 sides of the fence. And what was really interesting is the 3 I've talked to who are going through one of those big academies, literally get towards the end of their time, have worked that out now for themselves. I haven't spoken to any of them before, but they're sort of now talking to me, okay, well, I've just about got my competent advisor status. I will get my competent advisor status, but I really want to bring clients into the right side of the fence. So that's really quite interesting.
How long does it take for those individuals to work out what life could be like after they sort of finish the academy?
Do you know, I think that really depends on the person. I talk to people who have been in one of those academies for probably less than a month and worked it out. The 3 that I'm talked to this week, they're at the end. And I think, as I said in part 1 of this trilogy, was it part 1 or part 2? I can't remember. I kind of threw my professional principles out the window for 3 years. I think that's what these 3 are now thinking. I'm going to stay where I am. I'm going to get competent advisor status, but then I'm going to look and try and do what you did, which is sort of move to the other side of the fence and do this the way I'd quite like to do it. And what's also interesting, I've had a few conversations over the last few months with quite a lot of quite established chartered financial planners, particularly, who are... They sort of come to me with a starting point. There is a better way to do this than the environment I'm in at the moment. So what I'd like to do, Dave, is go out and do it on my own. And my sort of immediate question to them is, do you really want to do this on your own? Because, as you know, I'm much more in favour of people collaborating and getting together and creating some proper critical mass. And I do think one of the problems that we have in financial advice is this sort of historic, self-employed training academy kind of approach, which is almost encouraging people to think, I'm going to spend the rest of my career on my own in a self-employed environment. That's great if you've got these big organisations that want to shift product and investment. I completely get where they're coming from. But the difficulty is then that mentality sort of seems to carry on when they've decided there is a better way to do this, but they're still thinking, I'm going to have to do this on my own. So one of the things I'm hope we're going to get onto today, talking about the MBO, is really the point I've made to those three guys, and the point I continue to make to people is you don't need to do this on your own. It is far better to get together and collaborate. Build a bigger firm with people whose perhaps personalities, skills, experience complement your own. You do this on your own. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's certainly very, very difficult to get yourself directly authorised, which is the only way that you get full control. Quite rightly, the FCA doesn't like sole practitioners. I completely get that. There's a real lack of checks and balances for a start. But there's also the issue with ongoing sort of security. What happens if a sole practitioner goes under a bus? Everyone's got to have a locum, etc. But that locum may be a very different person. Would I, as a client, be attracted to dealing with a sole practitioner? No, I wouldn't. And I say this very, very often and very openly. I wouldn't want to deal with a sole practitioner. I want to forge a relationship with a firm so that I know if something perhaps tragic happens to that individual, somebody else is equipped to take over. And so that, again, seems to be a bit of a theme that's developing. And I've actually, in let's say, the kind of Midland band, just to keep it very broad, I'm hoping I've got 3 chartered financial planners now talking to each other.
Okay.
A big shining example that I do point people at is Finova Money down in London. The guys down there deliberately set up on their own. I think I said to you when I had the issue with the chartered financial planners wanting a stake in the equity of my old firm, Albert Goodman. We couldn't get that past the accountancy practice, so they began to leave. 2 of them left, set up on their own, got together.
So it can work, the
It
collaboration.
can
It's just
absolutely
about
work.
knowing the right people, though, isn't it?
is.
Because you can be quite lonely.
It can be very lonely doing it on your own, and I've done it on my own. And I say to people, I don't just knock it, I tried it. And I did it when it was relatively easy to get authorised. All I had to do was stick £10,000 in the bank. And I was up and running with a directly authorised firm. It is not that simple these days. And it's not just also the authorisation. The other issue is PI insurance. Yes, of course, you can go through a network and stay on your own, do it on a self-employed basis. But of course, networks will always bang on about how difficult it is to get directly authorised, because if everybody was directly authorised, there wouldn't be any networks, would there? So, what I have done over the last year, I think, is had some really quite interesting conversations. And I suppose what I'm sort of very pleased about is the feedback that I get suggests that, some people might think I'm a bit outspoken.
Just a few, Dave. Just a few.
And other people think I'm quite fixed in my views, and I absolutely am. I had a discussion with somebody on LinkedIn literally last night about why I'm fixed in these views. But I think the feedback I'm getting is a lot of people think that actually when they sit down and think about it, it does make sense. And what I'm really quite passionate about, as you can hopefully tell, is the actual formation and the sustenance of a proper profession. Because I don't think we're there yet. I think there are firms acting very professionally on their own, but there is no great unified, proper financial profession. And I do think, given the conversations I've been having with some of the younger chartered financial planners particularly, and some of the people that have now been through these academies, that actually the future's looking pretty bright. I think that what is also coming across to me is there is a raft of really quite experienced chartered financial planners who are still practising, who are very happily able to help share their knowledge and experience, because between us we've made probably some shocking mistakes, and I've told you about some of the ones I've made. It's great when we can learn from that experience and pass it on so that other people hopefully don't repeat those mistakes. It's been a great 12 months. I've really enjoyed it.
So when do you fully retire then? When you're moving away from LinkedIn?
Well, that's what I'm going to have to do. That is absolutely what I'm going to have to do, and I haven't quite decided yet. I said I'd do a year. I have just about done a year. My wife's retiring at Christmas. I've got the motorhome on the drive. And I don't know. It won't be much longer, James, I don't think. I'm still doing a bit of consultancy work, which I quite enjoy. I don't think I'm ready to stop entirely, but I will pull out of LinkedIn and commenting before I finally retire, without a doubt, because I just want to prove to myself I can pull out of LinkedIn. I think I've made my point.
I think you've made several points consistently. You've made a conviction. When you look back over the last 12 months, when you are posting on LinkedIn, is there anything that you wish you hadn't have written?
I probably wish in some cases I might I've obviously upset people. Some people think I've been quite rude. As I think I said to you, I don't necessarily pick up on that. I'm always have been very straightforward, very honest, very transparent in my views. I really don't believe in beating around the bush. There's nothing political about me. I can't abide people saying one thing and thinking another. So maybe I've been a little bit, shall we say, abrupt. I don't mean to be rude. I don't mean to cause offence. As I think I've said to you, why would I set out to do that? Because if I set out to do that, my point will not be made. It will just be lost in what people think is a sort of ill-disguised rant, if you like. So I don't know. I can't really think of any great examples.
How do you think the perception is, people looking into the profession? Because it is, whilst you say you're optimistic about the future, it is a tough profession to get into. And I'm thinking, if people are looking into what they see at the moment with some of the conversations about fees and the different approaches out there and proper financial advice and not being restricted or going through an academy, if I was looking on the outside looking in, I'd be thinking, is that the profession I want to be in?
I'd say my experience is different. I think what I'm actually doing, my feedback, and I get feedback from people who vehemently disagree with me, but what I would say is that's pretty much gone away.
Is that because they've blocked you, do you think?
I'm sure that some people who work for a certain organisation have been told not to debate with me in public. And as you know, I've offered to debate with them in public, but nobody's come back.
Still available?
It will be for a limited period of time, James, probably. But I would say, to the contrary, the feedback I'm getting, and particularly the feedback I've had over, say, the last 6 months, probably the first 6 months, quite a lot of the feedback was vitriolic. I fully expect that when I'm attacking certain business models. That's neither here nor there to me. But it was also that point, you are, you for that first 6 months, you're not really presenting us in a very good light here. We should be unified. Well, I'm never going to be unified when it comes to promoting what I think is bad practice. I'm just not going to do that. But that changed. And what I would say is the feedback I've had over the last 6 months, the second half of the year, has been much more about, you've given me hope. I can see a way forward now, because I always thought that if I did get into the financial advice sector, let's call it that in a generic sense, I thought I'd be coming under pressure to sell products. I thought I'd be out there on a self-employed basis being forced to sell these products. Like I went through in my first experience, when I first met with Allied Dunbar, rock up with a list of telephone numbers, sell that product to enough of those, and we'll teach you about another product. I've had an awful lot of feedback from people who said, we thought that was the only way. But what you're now doing is giving us hope. You're telling us that actually it is possible for financial advisors to behave to the same professional standards as lawyers and accountants, to be paid fees for giving technical advice. I've had quite a few chats with Steve Connolly, who you probably know, over the course of the last sort of 6 months. The thing that Steve and I slightly disagree on is I think I absolutely get where he's coming from. I think you absolutely can build a business around non-regulated advice. 90% of what I did was exactly what Steve Connolly is doing. You can really do that. But my sort of reservation was, that's great, I could put in place a fantastic financial plan, but if it needs a product or an investment to see it through to conclusion, if I don't go through and finish that off, I'm doing 90% of the job rather than 100% of the job. I'm sort of letting the client down. I'm perhaps defeating the object a bit here, because I can put a fantastic strategy together, but if I say to a client, right, for example, very simple scenario, right, you now need to go and invest that £500,000. If they go and invest that £500,000 in the wrong way, I can give them, maybe Steve Connolly gives them some guidance, etc. But ultimately, they're going to pick an investment manager. Well, if they pick the wrong one, it's kind of negating the work I've done to some extent. But, I think that's been another thing that I've seen advance over the course of the last year, is I do think Steve's model has come to fruition a bit more. And I do know people who followed his training, his structure, his, all that kind of stuff. And they seem to be getting on quite well. I was talking to a member of the legal profession literally this week. I'm not even going to give the gender on this one, but they are thinking about a second career. Because they've really enjoyed giving legal advice, but actually I suppose I can say private client solicitor, they have been engaging with clients who've engaged financial advisors. If I take myself back 35 years to when I was an accountant, I had to refer clients out. They've had exactly the same experience. They have picked up there is a real spectrum here. Some people are doing this very professionally. Some people really are not. And that particular solicitor is now sort of, right, I think I'm going to do what you did, Dave. She's listened to the podcast. I think I'm going to go and retrain as a financial advisor, because I believe now you've shown me that there is a way that I can do this to the same professional standards that I operate to as a solicitor.
It's interesting you've had that feedback, and as you say, you've given people hope. I've had feedback where they've come to me literally yesterday saying we've had to block Dave because he's too abrupt, put it that way. And then somebody emailed me yesterday and said, when you're seeing Dave next, he seems a bit grumpier than normal. Can you save him? I'm like, I'll do my best.
I am not, let's get that, on the table. I am not grumpy, James. What have I got to be grumpy about? I had a very, very successful career. I've exited the sector. I have a really quite enjoyable life now. I am not grumpy per se, but what I am is determined to highlight conflicts of interest and what I perceive these sort of two different sides of the fence to be. If you are acting at the moment on the professional side of the fence, and as I say, over the course of the last 6 months, the feedback I am getting is from that professional side of the fence, or from people who want to be on the side of the fence. They don't call me grumpy. They really don't. Do people on the industrial side of the fence call me grumpy? Well, they call me that and an awful lot worse. You know,
that's the polite way.
If they thought I was all sunshine and light, James, I think I'm failing to get my point across. I am pleased that those people think I'm grumpy. You know, and they used to sort of try and bat me away with that. You know, you're just a grumpy old bloke. Well, I'm not a grumpy old bloke. I'm a very happy old bloke. What have I got to be grumpy about? You know, I have a very nice life now. So I am not grumpy.
No, I can vouch for that. I've met you. I think your persona in person and on keyboard is completely different. Because I've met you, I've spent hours with you, and you are a completely different character.
Yeah.
And I've always said, getting what I believe sometimes are, you know, discussion or debates, which are, there is context to them. There's a lot of change. I think doing that on the keyboard, on LinkedIn, on a platform is not the greatest way to affect change. My sort of response to you is, whilst there's no doubt that people have come to you and you've shown them there's a different way, that is without, I know, because I've had the same conversations with those people. There's obviously other people who've just blocked you, but in terms of creating change, you know, meaningful change that will continue, because if you're not going to be on LinkedIn, what's going to happen next? What should the profession be doing more so? That's my question, because should we should the profession be working closely with the FCA, the PFS, to raise standards? So I'm looking at the enabler of change. If it's going to change, who's going to change? If that's the FCA, should there be more conversations with the FCA in London to say this is what we should be doing? How can we affect change, rather than having those echo chamber conversations on LinkedIn?
I would love to get into a discussion with the FCA. I absolutely think they need to be on board with this, and I do constantly challenge them on LinkedIn, as you know, and I don't get a response.
They won't respond.
I don't expect
is that Sheldon? Is that the one you always said, Sheldon?
Yeah. And I don't expect a response. But what I do hope is that somebody at the FCA is monitoring LinkedIn and picking up on these things where they're tagged in. I would love to talk to them. And I have tried to talk to them, or I did when I was practicing, as I said to you. You know, I wrote to them various times. My sort of issue, I mean, it's a massive job. It's a massive job they've got. And to be quite honest, it's really not a very easy job. The FCA is to a very large extent conflicted. You know, we talked a bit in one of the podcasts about the profile, the demographics of the financial advice sector. Most people are working in these big models. The biggest models are the biggest payers of fees and levy to the FCA. And because some of these models are, for the time being anyway, let's call it self-insured, even though some of their advice is dreadful, they don't fall back on the compensation scheme. You know, the biggest single amount I ever won during my my expert witness career was from one of those business models. That was paid by bank transfer from that organisation. They've got this critical mass. So the FCA has a really difficult decision to make here. I would hope that the FCA does take my point that I think there has to be complete segregation of the advice channel from the product manufacturer and investment management channel, because it's the only way. It's a massively important check and balance. I would hope the FCA gets that point and gets the point that huge numbers of people operating in those models have some very serious conflicts of interest. And I could give you feedback I've had from the 3 people I've talked to this week about how they absolutely believe these conflicts of interest are nailed on, which is why they want out. if the FCA is any decent regulator at all, it should absolutely get that point, and it should be thinking about, do we really want those conflicts of interest? If we're ever going to create a profession, they've got to go. I can't see a way to create a proper profession without the advice channel being segregated from the manufacturing channel. I don't know whether the FCA is thinking about that or not. Another conflict the FCA has is it likes dealing with big organisations. I'm sure, and you can see the logic of this, it would be very happy if it only had to regulate a dozen organisations. It doesn't like one-person bands, which is where huge parts of the rest of the sector are. So, the FCA has got these conflicts of its own. But if it is a decent regulator, and if it actually thinks, where would we like this profession to be in 30 years' time? I very much doubt whether I'll be around to see it. But what I think the FCA should do is say, where would we like this profession to be in 30 years' time? Hopefully what they would say is, yeah, we want to see a proper professional body of advisors who are acting on a conflict-free basis, like lawyers and accountants. They have no product other than their knowledge, their experience in applying it, and their personality when it comes to selling it. That's what financial advisors should be like.
Do you think the PFS are saying that to the FCA? Because part of their remit is to have conversations with a closer relationship with the FCA.
I despair of the PFS, quite frankly. I mean, I was a member of the PFS. My membership has now lapsed. I am no longer a member. They've tried to get me to renew it twice, actually. They gave me about 3 reminders saying it was... But
they need the money?
Well,
Seems to
I
have
think
gone.
the CII needs the money, James. I'm not sure. The PFS has got some, at least it has for the moment. I was talking to one of your colleagues literally just before we started this little chat here. I think professional financial advice needs its own professional body. The PFS is simply a subdivision of the insurance industry. The CISI, the IFP was a professional, standalone professional body, but if the IFP was around today, I think the critical mass that's been generated over the course of perhaps the last 5 years, this is when things really have begun to emerge in terms of people adopting proper professional principles. If the IFP was around today, I think it could well have the critical mass to become that professional body. But sadly, if you go back, a few years, it didn't have the critical mass, it didn't have the traction, which is why it had to sort of subsume into the CISI. But the CISI is more about investing. Advice, as I say, it should be completely segregated from products or investment. So what I think is, if I was still practicing, I would be talking to those proper professional chartered financial planners, certified financial planners who I know, to say, right, what I think we should do, people, is get together and form a new professional body. And I don't know, Steve Connolly, I'm absolutely sure thinks that way. He has actually built a bit of a accreditation scheme, a sort of training program. I think I've got no time at all for the PFS. I think they're CII puppets, to put it horribly crudely, to get back to being very straightforward about it.
That's not going to offend anyone, is it?
The
subtlety is not.
Well, I don't need to be subtle, James. Perhaps I wish I was.
But maybe
a bit
they
more
think
subtle,
it's better to influence from within, which was the old
Well,
Brexit argument, wasn't it? So if you're within, then you can.
Yeah,
you
they
can influence.
may do, but we've got an opportunity. I've seen a lot of chat on LinkedIn over the course of last week about the upcoming meeting. One thing I would urge PFS members to do is actually get a vote in there. this is your, well, at the moment, it is one of your sort of two or three professional bodies. If you just sit back and let the board of the PFS do what the CII is broadly telling it to do, you deserve everything you get. You know, I do think there's too much apathy around. But yeah, you know, I suppose, get back to your original point, I think professional financial advice needs its own professional body. And the other thing that I really do think is that the professional bodies that exist these days are really about exams, you know, about instilling technical knowledge. Well, when I trained as a chartered accountant, I went through a proper article training scheme. It took 2 to 3 years. What I am also picking up from my conversations with people looking to get into this, there is quite a degree of impatience.
In what way?
Well, one of the 3 academy just about graduates I talked to went to that particular academy because they thought it was a quick way to get up and running, which it is. Of course it is. Those academies want you out there selling products
to get
and
out,
investments.
to be competent.
Yeah, patience
right,
to,
okay,
you know, I've decided I want to be a financial advisor. I want to find the sort of quickest route I can to competent advisor status. Well, you know, I trained as a financial advisor and got competent advisor status within a matter of, I can't remember, but it was a few months, you know, maybe 4 months, something like that. When I qualified as a chartered accountant, it took me 2 to 3 years. And that was from the start of having some of the technical knowledge already. But during that 2 to 3 years, I was very closely not just supervised, but mentored.
Is that still the same now, though?
Yes.
It's still 2 to 3 years?
Yeah. Well, it should be, because, you know, it should be in financial advice. You know, things are better than they used to be. I mean, when it was just the old financial planning certificate, if you had anything about you, you could probably get those exams done in one sitting. You know, things have fortunately moved on, but it is still too easy to be, you know, there is more to becoming a professional advisor than having technical knowledge, in my view.
Yeah.
One of the things that I picked up by talking to people over the course of last year, and I very much agree with this, is, you know, financial advice is great as a second career. I absolutely think it's a better second career than a first career, and I have urged quite a lot of people, actually, did it with one of my own trainees, stick with the path you're on. I'm talking to a chartered accountant in training at the moment. What I'm saying to him is, stick to the path you're on. The best thing that I ever did before becoming a financial advisor was get a chartered accountancy qualification. You know, massively helpful.
Credibility.
To me. Credibility, but when it came to building a client base, I actually found it really quite easy, because, as I said to you, I built it by talking to chartered accountants and by bolting on my new service and competence to the ones that they had. And I, you know, okay, I'd been one of them for 9 years, so I thoroughly got what they were doing. But yes, you're absolutely right. Certainly, and we had that discussion, you know, I got a very different reaction when I told people I was a chartered accountant to the one I got if I told them I was a financial advisor. You know, it is credibility. But for that 2.5 to 3 years, I was supervised, I was mentored, but I had regular meetings with my training partner, and he would be giving me feedback from the client's perspective. Mine was particularly good. Mine would be getting feedback from clients for me as well. I would be asked about how the exams were going. You know, what bit of knowledge are you building now? Are we as a firm supporting you properly? Are you getting enough study time, etc.? Are we, you're building your technical knowledge there, but are we complementing that with the practical experience we're giving you? And how are you getting on with the clients? I've had some particularly good feedback from that client there about how you dealt with that audit or whatever it may have been. And I remember one time he told me, he said, right, I think you're now ready for this particular client, in a way that said to me, this particular client's going to be a bit of a challenge. And he said, I think you're ready for it, and I'm going to give you a bit of background on this, and I'm going to let you go, and, let's see how you get on. If I'd been dropped into that client 6 months earlier, it probably wouldn't have gone anywhere like as well. So I suppose what I'm saying, and the other thing that was instilled in me, James, by that training partner was professional ethics. Coming back to, you will never ever allow a conflict of interest to rise. You will never ever bring either yourself or particularly this firm into disrepute. We're going to make sure that you are let loose when you're ready, and none of that really exists as a standard. There are firms that are doing it, and I have built really quite a nice network of firms across the country. You've seen me on LinkedIn putting up posts. Anyone got an opportunity in London or wherever it may be? There are firms out there doing this. I absolutely know there are, and actually, I'm much encouraged because I hadn't realised that there are as many as there appear to be. So people are doing it, but they're doing it through their own initiative and off their own back. Wouldn't it be far better,
more efficient,
if a professional body said, yeah, we get that, that's the way we're going to ask all members of this body to behave? And one other thing, I think, this is just a personal view, I think if any firm is seeking chartered or certified or whatever status it may be, one of the requirements should be that they have at least one trainee in progress, and that trainee is following a properly thought out, properly structured, properly incremental training scheme. Because it's all very well a firm qualifying with chartered status, and I don't particularly think chartered status in its current form actually says a lot if I'm going to analyse it, but I'm not going to knock it because I think it is a step in the right direction. But I think it's all very well a firm having chartered status at the moment, but what happens if that firm hasn't got any succession planning in place? A client may have specifically chosen that firm because it's got chartered status. Well, if the chartered practitioner or you've got to have more than one, obviously you have, etc. But what's to say that?
But it's based on qualification, isn't it?
It's
not based on succession. It's not based on your training regime. It might do, I don't know, but my understanding is it's more to do with the level of qualification within the business. So
well, and
the profession's not doing enough.
No. And when it comes to professional ethics, it's a signature on a pretty limp declaration that I'm going to be professionally ethical about this. Well, does anybody ever check that? No, they don't.
Well, talking about that, Dave, I'm gonna draw your attention. Going back to LinkedIn, professional ethics, because this conversation today is going to be talking about internal succession and the MBO that you went through, and there's a couple of things that I've seen recently, because you're now back from holiday, so you're back on LinkedIn. So the algorithm must love you because it gets busier.
I'll tell you, I was actually even on LinkedIn from my motorhome.
I could tell. I could tell. The odd comment.
That's how horrible it's got, James.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things that I've seen recently. One yesterday, which was about MBO versus EOT, which we can lead into the main conversation. But the other one was on the post by Phil Bray, that poll about when do financial planners charge ongoing fees for their new clients, straight away, year one, year two. And 88% said it was immediately. I think I'm correct in saying, if I'm not. Forgive me.
I know it was
a high,
a very high figure. Yeah.
And then you said something like, well, you're going to put your two penneth in and you're likely to be appalled by some of this, and rightly so. People commented, and they had a different viewpoint. But I was interested, what was your reaction to that? Because that got quite a bit of debate, but it's also, you are in the minority there.
I am very definitely in the minority, and I suppose I am surprised by it, actually. But then if I think about it, I'm not at all surprised by it. I do bore on about my first career as a chartered accountant, but the point about that was that I only billed a client when I did some work. And, there would be a discrete bit of work to be done. And okay, yeah, we provided ongoing service. We produced management accounts, all that kind of stuff. We had monthly deliverables with a lot of people. Monthly work was involved. We were issuing monthly invoices, all that kind of stuff. But the point was there was work to be done. A lot of people on that post, and I thought it was a really interesting subject. I hadn't really thought about this, but I said to Phil, it's a great post. It's a really interesting question, because it is. My, I suppose, modus operandi was I would give the initial advice, and my advice would be all properly thought out, properly documented. I've gone through all the warts and all. Unlike some people, apparently, I wouldn't implement the advice until I was 100% sure the client fully understood it. My advice was documented in a very different way to an awful lot of the financial advice I read as an expert witness. But my advice read like a lawyer's advice or a chartered accountant's advice. It was setting everything out in English, what the advice was, all of the implications of it, how it met the client's objectives. I would only implement if I was sure the client was 100% happy. We took the time to do it, which is partly maybe, and people say, well, you were time-based. Of course you did. Well, I built in the time
you did,
that it would take me to explain all this properly. But my point, James, is when I got that client over the line with an implemented bit of advice, I was always available to them if any questions came up. Don't get me wrong, some people have accused me of just not talking to people for another year.
So when the budget happened and they had phoned you up and said, Dave, what's this?
Oh, of course.
Would you go, this national insurance is a bit
I liked Centurion's budget post on LinkedIn. I've liked 2 or 3 of them because everyone at Centurion is posting this now. Our clients, really, I don't know whether it was just me, but I never got bucket loads of inquiries after a budget. My clients knew that the next time I saw them, I'd taken the trouble to give this bit of advice. If a budget had been on the horizon, I would have made it quite clear that this bit of advice could be affected. Would you like me to hold back until the budget happens, or are you happy for me to implement this now, and then we'll deal with the budget next time I see you?
But if they phoned in,
of course I would talk.
God,
of course I would talk.
So you wouldn't go,
no,
all right, charging. No.
No. I would talk to them, and then so I was always available. And one of the great things about being retired is I'm no longer available to whatever it was, 150, maybe 200 people. But we would have a conversation. I wouldn't get the clock ticking for a telephone conversation. Of course I wouldn't. I mean, what kind of client service is that? I used to pride myself on my client service.
Solicitors do, though. They're very good at doing that.
Exactly. And maybe actually, and I have often thought this, could I learn from that? But the difference there, James, is I know I've got an ongoing relationship with my client. I used to record the time spent on the client. We get to the end of the year, we get to the review, I would know what time had been spent because I would record that telephone call as time being spent on the client, I wouldn't start the clock ticking. But at the end of the year with the review, I would know how much time I'd spent, and I would know what the fee was. And I would always, if I felt it was appropriate, talk about, we've spent quite a lot of time, we've charged you this, we're going to need to adjust that a bit next year. Of course I did. I'm a commercial animal, etc. So I would always talk to the client, but some people are saying, well, don't you get a raft of questions when you've implemented the advice? And my answer to that was no, I never did. I strongly suspect that anyone who gets a whole raft of questions just after the advice has been implemented or in the following few months probably hasn't been through that advice in enough detail with the client. One of the other things that I would always say to clients is, right, we're on a long-term journey here. I'm not going to lurch about just at the drop of a hat, just trying to change this whole strategy. This has been properly thought out. Yeah, if I'm talking about inheritance tax, and this budget did impact, obviously, on inheritance tax mitigation, yeah, I would have a long, hard look at certain clients, particularly those where I thought maybe there was a relatively short period of time.
But that's about
involved.
Context, though, isn't
that's
it?
absolutely about context.
It's not the
and I
the norm.
wouldn't, I would have documented the time that I'd spent thinking about the budget. I would probably find, but I wouldn't be thinking about it for particular clients. I'd be thinking about it for a particular client group. If I then felt there were certain clients I needed to talk to, I would ring them up. And I would say to them, this has happened. This is why I'm ringing you up. Maybe we need to have another chat. Now, if we are going to have another chat, it's going to go on the clock. If I actually have to do some work, I'm not going to bill it for you here and there, straight away. But what I am going to do is record the time. And then if I think I've spent a material amount, I will raise a bill for it. So it's tailoring the service to the client. My big beef, nobody answered this question because I did ask it of a couple of people. You start the clock ticking on day one, and the answer I got was, well, servicing starts from day one. Okay, what does servicing mean? What does servicing mean? Nobody actually answered that. And then we got into, well, it's the annual review. Yeah, okay, well, the annual review doesn't happen for 12 months. I would bill for an annual review that happens in 12 months, but I'm not going to start billing for that review that's happening in 12 months' time at this point in time. And I did, I made another point on there. What does the FCA think about billing in advance? Hasn't one of the big business models just got into 430 million quid's worth of trouble for telling people it was going to provide a service, but it didn't? Is it professional to bill in advance? I don't think it is. I suppose I say that from the perspective.
Do you think you touched a nerve with that one?
Well, I hope
because
so.
I found that quite an interesting
I hope so.
Debate.
But, and I suppose, you see, the other thing, James, coming back to the business plan that we discussed in an earlier chat, my business was very financially solid. I didn't worry about cash flow. I didn't need to start billing people in advance because I was worried about paying my staff that month. I knew exactly what the financial position of the business was. What I do suspect is that quite a lot of financial advisors live a bit hand to mouth, and it's very easy, isn't it? And this is one of my other points. As an accountant and as a lawyer, you've got no other way to charge a client than bill them directly. As a financial advisor, you have still got this possibility of, okay, well, I'll just put a 1% in this box on the application form and I'll kick it off to start straight away. You will be getting paid from day one. But actually, what are you doing in return from that? Nobody answered that question. I'm taking telephone calls, inquiries from them. well, I didn't used to get those. Not unless something hugely traumatic.
Yeah,
My husband died, or my husband's just been diagnosed with serious illness. Of course, absolutely got to jump on that straight away. But I never got clients ringing up about, that investment that you've recommended, how does it work? I never had. And I went through 2008. I went through an earlier crash. I picked up huge numbers of clients actually in 2008. And the way I picked up huge numbers of clients were my clients were telling their friends that I was there to take telephone calls. Did I get lots of telephone calls? No, I didn't. I didn't actually, because my clients and the investment strategy and the proposition that we put together, I went into quite a lot of detail. I used to tell clients in my advice, this is what I think the expected return on this is going to be. This is what I think the expected range of returns is going to be. But bear in mind, I'm 90% confident. 10% of the time, I expect the investments to perform outside of that range. Did clients panic if investments went down? No, they didn't, because they'd been primed to expect them to do that from time to time. My question to people who start charging from day one is, what exactly are you doing from day one? What are you doing? What does servicing actually mean? Does it mean I'm just sitting back and doing nothing, or does it actually mean, I'm doing stuff? Because I believe, again, coming back to the professional ethics that were hammered into me, you should only charge a client if you've done some work in return. And I suppose my other point, you see, is that when I did do work, I charged for it. That meant I was in a far better financial position, really. And my career was all about just trying to fill up my diary as much as possible with billable work. I think if you operate a different model, and perhaps you're on a percentage basis and all this kind of stuff, literally, you do need to get these clocks ticking, because you haven't got the financial stability that our business model gave our firm. So I thought it was a great question, Phil Bray. I thought it was a really interesting question. I was initially really quite surprised by that result, because I thought more people thought like I did, that you build clients when
had
you
over
do
250 odd people. So it's a fair sample size.
It is a fair sample size. So it's a great question. I was surprised at first instance, but then when I thought about it, I thought, no, I'm really not surprised. I think I said appalled. Am I appalled? Yeah, I am appalled if people are charging for not doing anything. What do I think, that what does it say about financial advice? We just get a clock ticking. And there was somebody on there who said, well, I'm billing in advance. Well, I said to that person, I suggest you have a look at your ethics. And I actually said, Sheldon Mills,
the FCA,
what do you think about this? Because that's something the FCA should have a view on. And as I say, there are very big organisations that have got themselves into a bit of a spot with promising service and not delivering it.
Okay, well.
So anyway, that's my views on that one.
Well, you're a man of views, Dave. But as
I've usually got a view, James.
But if anyone wants to counter it, brilliant. Because I think there is always context and nuance, and it'd be good to hear.
But and I said to
else.
Just if you tell me what you're actually doing from day one, that is what I would call chargeable work, then absolutely. Your business model obviously differs to mine, because I know my business model really was in a minority. So it's one bloke's view, isn't it, James?
One bloke's view, one man's cup of tea, another man's poison, as they say. Another LinkedIn post yesterday, which leads on to the MBO conversation, was somebody who was writing about an EOT, and again, you have an opinion on MBO, etc. And I found that interesting as well, because you've also written a very good document which you've kindly shared with me, and we will kindly have it as a downloadable PDF for people to view as well, about the ins and outs of an MBO or internal succession. I think that's what you call it. Just on that debate, just so I'm clear, because it did read that you were quite anti-EOT from the comments that I saw, but in your document you clearly say the owner of the business has to make the right decision for them. Yeah. So actually, I think what you say in your document is a bit more, again, more context rather than what it seemed to me as in you're only doing this for the tax break. Because I think some people definitely would do. Why not? 0%. But there'd be people who would perhaps in a different kind of business that would do it because it works for their business, for their employees. So I get that. But again, I found that an interesting debate. But just on that, my view, is that correct, that you're not anti-EOT, that there is decisions to be made by the owners of the business, what's right for them and their employees or business and clients?
Am I anti-EOT? No, I'm not anti it per se. What I am is very pro-internal succession, i.e. move your business on internally. I am very pro that. I am really much more sceptical about some of the big large-scale consolidation that's happened. Am I anti-EOT? No, I'm not, because I think in principle it's a nice idea, internal succession. But again, I'm very straightforward about this. I do think that, and I'm not the only one that thinks this, it's pretty clear that HMRC thinks this, that a lot of people have put in place an EOT, but they haven't perhaps run it in accordance with the EOT legislation to the extent they should have done. HMRC's been consulting on this for some time. It's been consulting on it, to my knowledge, for maybe perhaps 18 months, something like that.
How with EOTs, how long have they been in sort of
situ? I don't know, James. Quite a long time.
So it's a number of years.
It's not a new thing.
Yeah, okay.
No,
okay.
It is an evolving thing because actually, one of my big points about an EOT is it really can straitjacket a firm from a future funding perspective. Well, actually, I do think now that EOT's evolved a bit, it is possible to actually still raise external debt if your firm is owned by an EOT. It is certainly a lot more difficult to do it. Your EOT has to be structured in certain ways. Your trustees have to be happy to probably take on personal liability for any debt that the business borrows. So it's really not very straightforward. But EOT has evolved now, and there are lenders out there that will, as long as you jump through some really quite complicated hoops, lend money to an EOT. If you go back a few years, that would never have happened.
Is this post when the shareholders leave the business, or is this to raise finance for the actual EOT to make it happen?
I mean, I suppose you're right. I've set all my views out in that document. What I hope I have set out in that document is a very balanced view of EOT and MBO. When Stuart and I put Centurion together, we did discuss how we were going to exit this business in due course.
So let me just say, was that 7 years ago? I just want to get the time frame. So you and Stuart got together, and was it like 7 years?
It was 2016. I think it was 2016. Stuart and I put our two businesses together.
And you were the two main shareholders, is that right?
Yeah, we were, as I think I said to you, Stuart and I put our two little firms together, and we didn't mess about. We just said we're going to bring this together. We're going to take a 50-50 stake in it. We're not going to mess about valuing each other's respective bits. You bring stuff to this party, I bring stuff to this party. We complement each other. It's 50-50. At that point, we also agreed that we were going to build this firm over that 7-year period, that my retirement was going to happen, and this wasn't cast in stone, James, but it was, Stuart, I think I'm going to want to retire in about 2023, 24, something like that.
You were going to retire.
That was me.
That was you. Yeah. And Stuart
and Stuart's younger than I am. You can tell that if you look at Stuart compared to looking at me.
I don't judge, Dave.
So that was the initial time horizon. Now at that point, Stuart and I absolutely decided that what we wanted to do was build a firm that was going to perpetuate one way or another. We had two possible options available to us. One was we went down an EOT route, because we could have done. One of the criteria of an EOT is that you have to transfer at least 51% of the shares. The employee ownership trust must take a majority stake. Stuart and I could have done that, when we were 50-50. We looked at that option. We fully understood that at the end of the day, our plan was to build a much bigger firm and actually create some capital gain. We knew full well that we could have exited through an EOT and not worried about a capital gains tax bill. And one of the things that really sticks with me from the current budget is Stuart is now going to be paying a higher tax rate than I am, which, that's to some extent luck of the draw, but I don't feel particularly good about that. I got away with the bulk of my tax being incurred at 10%. Stuart is now going to be retiring in a few years' time. It's going to be a different.
Is it 14% now? Is it gone?
Well, it's going up to 18. It's 14. This is the special business asset disposal relief rate. So it's going up to 14%. April 25, and then after that up to 18. So, he's going to be paying almost double the rate. I mean, to be fair, the way the business is growing, he might well end up better in a net sense than I am, because the business is still going from strength to strength. But one of the key reasons I believe it's going from strength to strength is we did an MBO rather than an EOT. So we could have done an EOT. I could have saved myself a considerable six-figure tax liability, which I am going to pay sometime between now and the 31st of January. But how analytical I can be. I looked into it in huge amounts of depth. Of course, it isn't CGT exemption a massively attractive thing. So, of course, I looked at it. And then I thought, no. Because if we go down that route, we literally are going to put this firm into a straitjacket.
In what sense a straitjacket?
In what sense? When you complete an EOT, you have transferred at least 51% of the shares into a trust. If you read the legislation, that trust is there for the benefit of employees. Yeah. And the trustees have a strict legal duty to represent the employees and to act in their best interests.
Are the trustees outside the company? Can it be an independent trustee?
There is. I believe there is now going to be a requirement for an independent trustee. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that, James, but I believe that this is one of the big issues. Historically, no.
Right. Okay.
You've got this trustee, and I was a trust and estate practitioner. I am very straightforward. I'm very analytical. I was a qualified trust and estate practitioner. I understand trustee liability and how strict that is. So you now have a majority of the company shares being owned by trustees who have strict legal duties, and the essence is that they are legally required to represent the employee's best interest. Okay.
Yep.
Now, an employee or the employees are one of three stakeholders in a firm. The other two are the clients and the owners. Okay.
Hmm.
So what you've now got is effectively ownership in the hands of the employees. That's the theory, but actually it's in the hands of trustees. Those trustees are not directors of the business. One other thing is that in order to do an EOT, you've got to be a company. So a company is run by its directors. You're a company director. Mm-hmm. You run your business. Yeah. What you then have instantly is a potential conflict. To my mind, you've got the directors who have the responsibility for running the business. I know what running a business is like. I've done it for quite a long time. I made decisions here that I honestly believed balanced the interests of the three stakeholders sensibly and equally. And actually, for a good time, when Stuart and I set up Centurion, as I said to you, we subordinated our interest as owners to the interests of staff to build the team and to the clients to get it all properly off the ground. Yeah. So, but where you have an EOT, you now have trustees with strict legal duty, and you have directors with a strict legal duty to the company. There is a conflict, potentially. Your point's quite interesting because, if somebody's just sold their shares to an EOT, the other thing that they are now dependent on is the company profits being sufficient to pay them out. Well, having the sort of ownership and the control, if you like, of the company in these two different camps doesn't, to me, make very good business sense.
For your business, or
for any business, right, for any business, I would say. So I believe that the best people to run the business are the people who are qualified to do it, the ones who are experienced to do it, the ones who've got the ideas, the ones who sort of put the time and effort into the business. I wouldn't want to fetter that at all. I wanted to pass my business on to certain colleagues.
So who drives the business under an EOT then?
Well, in theory, the directors.
Under an EOT?
Yes, in theory. But the big issue that the revenue have got is if you look at most of the EOTs that have been done, of course, this owner now has sold his shares over here. He is dependent on the directors running the business to make profits. The directors also have another decision to make, which is how are these profits distributed? Because it's the directors who make the decision to distribute profits to the EOT. The EOT trustees can only distribute profit if the directors have given them some profit. Well, you probably can see where I'm coming from here. HMRC's concern is that this director here has sold his shares to this trust over here. Very often, this director here will become a trustee of that. He's still a director of the company. He is his first and foremost, well, I'm saying his, let's be gender neutral here. Their primary objective is probably to get themselves paid out. Okay. There will almost certainly be a contract in the sale of the business to the EOT saying I have got first call on these profits. So actually, is this EOT going to be functioning properly? Because the ownership of the company is supposed to be in the hands of the employees. What happens if the trustees sort of say, right, well, we think we should be representing the interests of employees. You're not paying enough profit over to us. We haven't got anything to distribute to our employees. One of the big things is, you see, everyone bangs on about this is ownership by employees. No, it isn't. It's ownership by trustees who are acting on behalf of employees. But if those trustees are in hock to this owner still, if the owner is still one of those trustees, I mean, you know what running a small business is like, that very often they're set up by a dominant personality. Fortunately, it wasn't the case in ours, because Stuart and I are equally sort of robust.
See, I looked at it yesterday. I spoke to the guy who obviously promotes EOTs. And, you know, it was great actually. Very much similar to your white paper. You've got to do what you think is right. But there was a part of me, I thought, in a way, it's quite maybe romantic to give shares to the employees who've helped me build a business. So I looked at it and I thought, I didn't look at the tax liability. You can't ignore it, but it was that romantic feeling of actually, you know, giving something to individuals who've helped me. But then I know running a business, the determination, the graft, the resilience you have to show and the decisions you have to make, which are tough. I then thought, well, who would be driving it forward afterwards? So I had questions. I wasn't dismissing it, but it made me think, actually, in a way, that's quite romantic. That'd be nice to do for everyone. But would it continue?
It's potentially hugely romantic, James. But what's wrong with just bringing your employees into shares? I am doing a bit of consultancy with a business at the moment. I'm not going to mention the name, but it's a great little business. Their admin staff hold a small number of shares in the business. This is no employee ownership trust. The directors, the owners, the ones that have really put skin in the game, hold the ownership and control. But they have brought their team, if you like, into the same class of shares. Now, my point there is, if a dividend is paid to them because the employee holds the same class of share, the employee is also entitled to a pro rata dividend. That's proper distribution of ownership to employees. There's no fudging this. If I'm paying myself a dividend, and of course they are paying themselves dividends, that's the bulk of their income on a monthly basis. So employees follow on and get a little bit of dividend every month as well. But overall, you see, when I became an equity partner in a firm of chartered accountants, I had to prove myself. I had to earn the respect of the partners, who sort of looked at me and said, right, well, we like you. You're doing a good job for this firm. You know, we want you on our partnership table because we think you can add something to this firm. Now, that's great. Lovely to have the invitation. I was asked to contribute very considerable six-figure sum of capital. I did that because I thought, okay, I can see where this is going. It is worth me putting that money on the table, because ultimately, apart from anything else, it will give me an awful lot more autonomy, but it will work out for me financially because I know roughly what sort of profit share I'm going to get. You know, but I put skin in the game. I earned the right to become an owner of the firm. They didn't give it to me. I had to buy it. When, as I said in our earlier podcast, Stuart and I, when we put the firm together and we did our sort of SWOT analysis, we realised we had two weaknesses. Well, we had more than two weaknesses, but the two critical ones. We need someone to come in and run the big joint venture. That was Chris. Free me up.
Yeah.
The other thing we need is someone to come in and run the back office, the IT, the processes. That was Steve. We brought them in. We didn't bring them into equity straight away because we didn't really know each other very well. We wanted to make sure we could all work together, and I absolutely thought they were going to contribute. We wouldn't have brought them in had we not thought they were going to contribute. They absolutely thought they were going to contribute.
But it was part of the conversation, was it?
Absolutely part
so
of the conversation.
If this goes well.
What I said to them is, right, 12 months' time, if this goes well, we will bring you into equity. I can't write it down for you because it will cause potentially tax problems. It becomes a benefit of kind, but you've got to take this on trust. And our quid pro quo, as I said to you, we paid them some really quite significant salaries that were a lot more than we were taking out of the business. And so we all built this bond of trust. And then we said, right, this has all gone very well. we are wanting to bring you into equity now. And I had to do the calculation. I had to put it past our auditors. We had to get revenue clearance on it. I wanted to charge them as little. Well, it was a balance. I wanted to charge them a figure that meant they had very definitely put skin in the game. You know, if they put 100 quid in, would they be too worried about it? No, of course they wouldn't. So we settled on a figure, and I managed to discount that as far as I could. So we were on balance happy.
Physical cash.
They had to put
the
physical
business.
cash into the business, and
so no sort of you won't earn any bonus or anything like that, because you can skin it different ways, can't you?
Yeah, exactly.
It was a case of, I want you to be with me in this business, but put money on it.
Yeah, and we will bring you into exactly the same class of shares that Stuart and I hold. There is no funny business about this. What that means is, you know, and what I actually did, James, was, or what we did, was we created a separate class of shares. I think I told you this. We had A shares and B shares in our company. The A shares were the ones that owned the company, that controlled the company, if you like. And we brought them in to 5% each of the A shares. What we also did was we created a B share, and we created 4 B shares. Stuart had one, Chris had one, Steve had one, I had one. And what we agreed with our other shareholders, our lawyer shareholders, was that B share will have entitlement to the first X amount of profit every year. And that profit then gets distributed as a B share dividend. So Stuart, Chris, Steve and I all got exactly the same dividend. So there's no funny business at all. You know, we all had a basic salary of £1,000 a month. We all had a pension contribution, I think it was £1,000 a month. But the bulk of our income came from an equal share in the dividend. Now, Stuart and I had put an awful lot more time, effort and money into that business than they had, but we held more A shares. This was a way to bring them in, to make sure that they were treated on equal terms effectively. We didn't distribute any A share dividends. We earned our living out of the B share dividends. The A shares were there for the longer term. When I came to exit through my MBO, I sold however many million A shares I held, and I can't remember how many there were, and I sold 1 B share. And the purchase price of my shares was divided between all those A shares and the 1 B share. As part of my exit, Steve and Chris bought another 5% of the A shares. And the 2 new guys, John and Dan, who came into the equity, were asked to contribute, or asked to, you know, do you want to come into the equity? They were brought in at 5%. They paid more for their 5% than Steve and Chris had paid for the 5% they bought, because the value had gone up. Of course it had. Steve and Chris are probably, if I look at this today, I mean, I was talking to the guys again a couple of weeks ago. The business is going from strength to strength. I always thought it would, but why is it partly why is it going from strength to strength? Well, it's in the hands of Stuart, Steve, Chris, John and Dan, with some sleeping shareholders, very wise people behind them, who are there to give them a bit of a steer if they want. Now, it's those 5 people who are running the business. They are not accountable to anybody else. They're not fettered by anybody else. It's their business. One of the points that Chris Budd made to me, and I can't disagree with this one, I wanted to exit my firm through an MBO because I wanted to prove to people that it is possible to build a firm and pass it on. You know, one of the big things that staggers me is accountants and lawyers have been building firms exactly in the same way that Stuart and I built Centurion for hundreds of years. But financial advisors think when it gets to retirement, I've got to find some external purchaser to buy my firm off me. Effectively, what we're doing is buying the client base, really. But, why do you think like that? But when I exited through an MBA, that was more about proving a point to me. And as I say, it worked out very well for me. I got exactly the same number of pound notes as I would have done from any sensible third-party purchaser. But I've proved my point now, and I have exited that firm. I exited my shareholding, I exited my directorship on the day I retired. They are now in control. They've earned the right to run that firm.
So they're running the show.
They are running the show. Chris Budd's point, and I can't disagree with it, is what happens if they choose to sell to an external third party down the line? Well, my point there is they're perfectly entitled to do that if that's what they want to do. It is their business. They have bought that business from me. I really don't think they'll be looking to sell that for the foreseeable future because, we still talk a lot. I'm going out for a pint with them next week, I think it is, or the week after. They want to tell me, actually, and this is part of the pride thing, they want to tell me how they're doing now. I'm going there because I'm delighted that they want to tell me how they're going. But am I sitting there on the sidelines interfering? No, I'm not. I have a very clear contract. The firm is going from strength to strength because we work together as a team for 7 years in Stuart and I's case, probably about 5 in the case of Steve and Chris. John and Dan I'd worked with for 3 or 4 years, but they not at board level, but I knew them very well. The firm is going from strength to strength because they're the right people to run it. If that had been run by an employee ownership trust, and they took on a little bit of debt in order to, I think it was more probably done for working capital. It wasn't a case of, right, we're going to borrow that money from the bank and immediately pass it over to Dave. That didn't happen. But Steve and I went through the business plan in a huge amount of detail in the year before I retired. We felt it would be good to get a bit more working capital in there for various reasons to build this firm. And partly, you see, one of the things was build our own platform, which has real long-term benefits. Come back to an employee ownership trust. Would it be in the interest of employees to build your own platform? Probably not, actually, because the whole aim of building a platform was to improve efficiency. We probably don't need as many employees. No one's lost their job. Of course they haven't. But what we've done is free up more time. If I'm sitting there as an employee ownership trustee, well, do I really want this platform in this firm? For a start, you're spending all this money on building it. That could have gone to our employees as a profit share.
But if a firm wasn't interested in growth, or if they were just interested in just treading water, just carrying on, then that would lessen the risk because your Centurion it's got its new captains at the wheel. They're driving the ship. They're pushing it forward, and I can see what they're doing. But on the flip side, it could be that the other company isn't looking to grow, so it's less of a risk because it's just treading water.
I would argue entirely the opposite, James. What happens to a business that stays still? Your client base will turn over. Your client base will age. You will shrink in real terms. Your cost base is going to increase because of inflation. There's various ways to increase your top line, but there is a limit to what clients will stomach in terms of a fee rate. Of course there is. And actually, coming back to professional ethics, you can't just pass your costs on to your clients, I don't believe. That's just lazy in my view. Any business needs to grow. Centurion will never become as big as some of the big academies. Of course it won't. There is a finite limit. I always said I didn't want to be in partnership with any more people than could sit round a reasonable sized table. But a firm needs to grow, and the management of that firm, the owners of that firm, need to be able to react. And I am not, as you can probably tell, a lover of bureaucracy. Would I want to account to the trustees of an employee ownership trust for my decisions? No, I wouldn't.
Yeah,
I really wouldn't. Do I think that would help my business? No, I think it will make it very inefficient. And at the end of the day, you see, people bang on about this 3,600 that can be passed to employees.
Tax-free.
Well, I'm not. This is not disparaging. 3,600 is a large amount of money for perhaps a very junior administrator. Of course, it is. What are they actually saving in tax? Well, let's say 20%. Well, why don't I just pay them a bonus of £4,500? After they've paid tax, they'll be better off. But what I can do is I can look at that employee and I can say, right, you've impressed me. There are two ways financially I can reciprocate. One is I can give you a salary increase, or the other is I can give you a bonus. The same tax effect, of course there is, but I can target that to you because I think you've specifically earned it. That person, I mean, and I want to emphasise, I am not sort of using Centurion to illustrate this, because I was 100% happy with all of my colleagues. We did have a couple come and go, but they went because we weren't happy with them. But let's say in a bigger firm, I want to benefit employee A. I don't want to benefit employee B, who's sitting next to them, because employee B has been here for the same length of time. They're sitting at the same level in the firm. They own broadly the same kind of salary, but employee B is forever turning up late, is forever going home early, is forever making errors in their work. Employee A is fantastic around the office. He's got a great atmosphere going here.
So you can't do that under an EOT,
no,
as in you can't give more to one.
No, an EOT benefit. There is a slight caveat to this, James. You can caveat in terms of length of service. You can define eligibility. But if I've got two pretty identical employees, A and B, and I really quite like employee A, and I think employee A is worth a bonus, I can't pay employee A a bonus without paying one to employee B. Now, you talk about EOTs being an incentive. Well, how incentivised is employee A now going to be? They think they've done a very good job. I think they've done a very good job. They're probably sitting right next to employee B every day of the week thinking, oh God, pull your socks up, stop whinging, why have you turned up late again today? They will realise employee B has got exactly the same bonus as them under the EOT. Is an EOT really an incentive? I'd argue very strongly in that scenario it's a real disincentive, because employee A then says,
well, my view
what was the point?
My view's always been meritocracy.
Absolutely, bang on, because and so's mine.
Yeah, because you reward the ones who do over and above.
Yeah.
And if that is true, and I don't know all the technical details, but if that was true, that would be, for me, that would be off-putting.
And you see, the other point, Chris Budd made this point in that LinkedIn post. I don't know what the future of Centurion is going to be, apart from the fact I know it's carrying on in an extremely successful fashion. I don't know whether the guys are still going to be running that firm in 30 years. Well, if it is 30 years, it'll probably be some different guys. Certainly Stuart won't be there in 30 years. Are they going to sell it out? I don't know. But if they think that's the right thing to do, I trust them to make the right decision. It's their call. They own it. They paid
They've
for
earned-
it.
they've
You know,
earned it,
they
yeah.
paid for it. I'm not sitting around interfering with the way they run the business. You know, if I thought there was any risk of them not paying the final 40% that's due to me, I might be showing a little bit more interest. But actually, I'm so relaxed about this. I didn't have any terms in that sale contract giving me any right to interfere, because I am 100% sure that firm is in superb shape and it will pay me exactly what is due to me. You know, it's paid me the 60% that it's paid out to me so far, absolutely on the nail. No question at all. If I have, and you know, my MBO was financed partly by company profit, which we'd banked because we'd been stockpiling a bit of cash because we knew I was going to be exiting.
So were you
But-
taking sort of less dividends then in that
Well,
respect?
not
Or
really. No, I mean the profit pile was growing.
The profit, so you
You
just
know,
weren't extracting
But
it.
we had
Right.
a fixed, you know, our agreement was that we had a fixed amount of profit that would go to the B shares every year. We didn't change that. We didn't need to, you know, but that was fine. We were all living on that. But we didn't pay any dividend on the A shares. That was why the
That
cash
was the stockpile.
Yeah. But the other contributors to that were Steve and Chris bought some more shares, and John and Dan bought in for the first time. So part of the cash that was paid to me came from those four guys. And actually, one point I should make before I forget this is a couple of them use pension funds to buy in. You know, one of the other things that
So are they over 50 then? Is that how you do it?
No, they invested their
Oh, right,
SIPs.
okay.
You know, we had an investable business, which brings me back to my point of a business plan and a properly run business. Yeah, no pension trustee is going to allow you to invest your pension in something that's not investable. Well, we had an extremely solid business, and we showed one particular pension trustee who knew us very well how solid our business was, and we said to them, is this investable as far as you're concerned? You're sitting there as a pension trustee, would you allow your SIP holders to invest in this business? They said yes. So I said, that's great, that's all we need to know. That then opens up the possibility of them using their pension funds. Now, of course, they're all financial advisors. What they have done by investing part of their pension fund in the firm is they've certainly concentrated their risk. But on the other hand, these guys back themselves. I back these guys. You know, I put my trust in them to a considerable extent. You know, yes, I've got a contract. They're entitled. You know, I've got a debt. It's a secured debt. But I didn't want any hassle about that debt being paid. So those guys back themselves. I absolutely back them. But what it means is that I talk to no end of younger chartered financial planners who are sort of, well, I'd like to start up my own business. And I'm sort of, are you really sure? You know, it's not that easy. Why don't you look for someone in your area who is likely to be retiring over the next few years? Why don't you get together with them? And you know, they might think, well, you're a young chartered financial planner. You've not got enough money to take me out. Well, part of that thing I've written is about how you build a proper business plan and, you know, grow a firm. But the other point is, every young chartered financial planner I know, and a huge number of the comments I see on LinkedIn are, bang money into a pension scheme because it's so tax efficient. Now, all of those young chartered financial planners who are wanting to build businesses almost certainly will have some degree of pension fund. Well, that is potentially a way to buy into the equity of a financial advisor. It's got to be a solid, investable
it's got to
one.
be a good business.
But then, isn't that a good check and balance? If the pension trustees had turned around to us and said, no, we're not happy for people to invest in you. If I was John, Chris, Steve and Dan, I'd have thought, oh, maybe Dave's not quite right about how solid this business is. So there is an independent check and balance there. The pension trustees are saying, we think this business is investable. They've got legal obligations. They're trustees. So isn't that great? You know, my point to all these young chartered financial planners is, if you've got a pension fund, that is potentially a way to buy in. You don't necessarily need to go and borrow money from a bank. You don't need to double your mortgage. You don't need to remortgage your house and all the rest of it. You know, if your pension fund is going to sit there for the next 25, 30, 40, well, you know,
who knows?
I'm going to get my state pension at 67. I actually, James, going back a few years, I actually seriously wondered whether I would get a state pension. But anyway, who knows when these guys are going to get to retirement age, you know. But if you back yourself to build a business, isn't that potentially quite a good use of your pension fund? Yes, you're increasing your risk. Yes, you're reducing your diversification. But if you think you can properly build a fund, a firm, and in theory, it's a lot easier to build from a base that already exists. So why focus on setting up your own? Why not look at your pension asset and think, actually, I could look for another local firm and see if the principal is interested in me buying into this. And the other point I would make to retiring principals, and I say that in that sort of little guide I've written, you know, the best thing I ever did was build a firm in collaboration with other people. And, you know, you asked me, one of your points was going to be, looking back on this 35 odd year career or it's ever been, have you got any regrets? Would you have done anything different? And my initial answer to you was, I don't think I would, actually. But then I said to you, actually, yes. The one regret I have got is that I didn't collaborate earlier with the guys that I collaborated with over the last 7 years. Looking back, if Stuart and I had got together 20 years ago, we'd have built a far bigger and better firm than we actually built, and the one we built was a pretty bloody good one. You know, so.
But you can't look back. But
no, I'm not looking back.
But what you can do
literally,
is you're giving people advice to say, actually, there is another way of.
Yeah, and part of this
year. On your own,
part of this year is me passing on, you know, the benefits. Some people might call it the madness of a 35-year career, but that is the one thing I would have done differently. You know, I put a considerable amount of money into buying into an equity partnership in a firm of accountants. That went very, very well. That was absolutely fine. That then enabled me, I guess, to treat Centurion as my pet project. You know, building Centurion was never really about the money. I've said this before. I'm not particularly motivated by money, but I didn't need to be when I built Centurion. I was much more motivated, I suppose, by the point of, I want to build this firm to prove that it can be done. I've proved my point now. That's why I'm not a grumpy old bloke. I'm a very happy old bloke. I have proved that point. And so the experience I would try and pass on to people is, get together and collaborate. Stop ploughing your own little one-person furrows. You know, get together, collaborate. The sum of the parts will create a much greater whole. And you know, people said to me, "Well, you took yourself down." I took myself down from. Stuart took himself down from 50% equity. 27, I think, was roughly what I sold. In the end, 27% of the equity. And people said to me, "Why did you do that?" You know, well, I did it, because I want to prove my point. But if you're saying, why did you do that from a financial perspective, I am 100% sure that worked from a financial perspective. The value of my 27% was worth probably an awful lot more than the value of the 50% would have been had Stuart and I hung on to the equity ourselves. And I would say that over a 7-year period. Think of what the difference could be if you took that view over a 15, 20, 25-year period. You know, so Yeah, that would be my point. And would an EOT have facilitated the growth of Centurion? No. My point to Chris Budd is it would have stifled it. And particularly, that firm is growing. Speaking as an accountant, when you are growing a firm to the extent that firm is growing, your biggest issue is working capital. If you set up an employee ownership trust, it becomes far more difficult to borrow external debt funding. It is probably possible now, but it's not easy. There are a limited range of lenders. You've got to jump through hoops, and you're almost certainly going to pay a higher interest rate. Well, if Centurion needs to boost its working capital a bit, it's got no problem at all with that particular source of funding. I'm not saying they do it. It is an option.
But the MBO is cleaner.
The MBO is absolutely cleaner, and that I think, and I looked at this, and as I said to you, I took a long, hard look at this with Stuart 7 years ago, or maybe it wasn't quite 7 years ago. It might have been about 5 years ago, something like that. And we said, right, well, we could get away scot-free with capital gains tax. This is the point. You can only go on the legislation that's in front of you at the time, because it does change a bit. But we could get away scot-free. The price of not getting away scot-free, or if you like, the price of getting away scot-free is that we put this firm into a straitjacket. We make that long-term decision for the firm. Well, I don't, I'm not an owner of that firm anymore. What right have I got to put that straitjacket around that firm? Because the other thing about an EOT is not only does it potentially really make your funding a lot more difficult, it is very, very difficult, if not impossible, to sell a firm that is owned by an EOT. It is very difficult to merge a firm that is owned by an EOT. So if Stuart and I had gone for an EOT, we would have made a decision that would have massively serious long-term implications for that firm. Well, I don't know what the future holds. What right have I got to wrap that straitjacket, that long-term straitjacket around that firm? It just didn't make any sense to me, and the price. So
you don't regret the decision anyway.
I absolutely do not. I mean,
even though it's going to be captured by
no, Stuart. I mean, I wouldn't be at all surprised if Stuart nets a higher net value after paying 18% capital gains tax than I did paying 10%. That firm is going from strength to strength, and one of the other things, you see, the crucial point, I mean, I talk in that little guide I wrote, we hadn't talked about value in the firm, but Stuart and I agreed a valuation basis. The guys, when they came in, agreed a valuation basis. It was never cast in stone, because you can't agree a valuation years out, but we agreed a principle. It would be a multiple of EBITDA, operating profit. What we agreed was that we'll multiply the EBITDA, and we took the EBITDA, not the actual final EBITDA, if you like, but we looked at the EBITDA 2 or 3 years ago. We knew we were going to be spending some money. I said to the guys, look, I want to be completely conflict free on this. Looking at the EBITDA now, looking at that multiple, I think that's reasonable. I say in that guide the multiple is somewhere between 4 and 10. The bigger the firm, the more solid the firm, the higher the multiple you will get. £1 million of profit, operating profit, is a bit of a threshold. You would almost certainly expect to be valuing it 10 times if you get to there. Anyway, we agreed a valuation basis. That figure broadly worked out at X number of pounds. We said, right, unless something fundamental changes that is beyond our control, that's the figure we're going to agree. And we agreed that figure probably 24, 30 months before I retired. And what that then meant was, again, the firm was free to spend its money. I'm not going to sit there and try and oppose spending money on the basis that, well, that drops profit, so what you get out of this is going to be less. We agreed that figure, and the way the firm is going now, if you applied even that same multiple to profit, the profit has grown since I've left. You know, am I upset by that? No, I don't think. I don't think I was a drain on the profits of that firm. I just think it's because the guys are running this. There's more of them. They've got better ideas.
It's growing.
You know, it is a growing
Yeah.
business. It's taking on more trainees. You know, I'm talking to them about somebody else at the moment that I'd like them to take on.
What's the biggest piece of advice you could give somebody who is now thinking about exit planning? What was, because you've talked about business planning, haven't you? You've obviously had conversations with Stuart. You were very straight with him, but companies are different. People are different.
Those were two-way conversations. You
Yeah.
know, we were absolutely legitimate business partners, and when we brought Steve and Chris in, they were four-way. Stuart and I may have had the equity, but it was an agreement between four people. You know, the biggest piece of advice about some of the things about exit planning, well, I could say read that thing I've written.
Will be available.
That sort of set out my thoughts, and as I've said to you, I do think having read it again, I think it's a bit long-winded. I think it could maybe do with a bit of an edit, but I'm not going to do that because I think those are just the legitimate thoughts I had, and I wrote them down. Time frame. You can sell to an external buyer at the drop of a hat. If you've got a reasonable financial planning business, you will find a buyer for it. You may not get the price you think it's worth. You know, the glory days of consolidation and stupid valuations have gone. You know, that's my reading of the situation, and everybody who's involved in M&A activity tells me that's the case. There are fewer buyers. They're more discerning. But if you want to sell in the next 12 months, probably your only option is going to be an external sale. If you've got a very solid business and you have got your internal successor working in the firm at the moment, I would say probably you're looking at 12, 24 months to get this done. But you need to decide in principle. And I put in my little guide thing, I think this needs to be broken down into stages. Stuart and I had the benefit of starting a firm pretty much from scratch and building it with this objective in mind. If I had a firm there now that I was running, I would actually not be thinking about the valuation of the firm per se from that as a starting point. What I'd be saying is, when do I want to retire? And broadly, how much money do I need or want for my interest in this firm? And then I say in that guide, what I would do is a sort of initial feasibility study. That's not just all about numbers, that's also about the state of the firm. How feasible is that valuation over that period of time? Because if you've got an internal successor, they are going to be a more discerning buyer, if you like. An external buyer will have a valuation in mind at the moment. They're not going to budge on that. You know, they'll come in, they'll offer you that amount of money, you will take it or leave it. But if you're working with an internal successor, you need to think, how much do I want? When do I want it? And then you need to look at the fundamentals of your business. And if you haven't got a business plan, and if you haven't got regular management accounts, and you don't know where you're going with this, you're shooting in the dark. So you really need to understand your firm and its profitability, and you need to understand where it's going to be at the point in time you want to exit. And then, is that value I want a fair valuation? Put myself in the internal successor's shoes. Is that a reasonable price to pay for what I'm ultimately going to get here. So you need to think, do the numbers work? And you're doing this without talking to anybody else about it. Maybe if you're not happy to do it yourself, get an external consultant. And I'm not touting for work there, by the way. I've got all the consultancy work I need. Do it on your own. Don't bring anybody else into this apart from maybe an external consultant. If your figure and your time frame come back as that's just not feasible, then you're probably then thinking, well, is an internal succession feasible then? Or do I go external succession? An internal succession will involve more time and effort on your part. There's no doubt at all about that. Okay, I'm not going to get that figure by internal succession. Maybe I'll just pitch to the market and see if anybody else will do it. But if you're really committed to sustaining the firm, and I am, one of my consultancy roles at the moment, I'm helping a child and a father transition a business. I'm also talking to another firm where there is a retiring principal, and but he has a number two who he wants to make sure is taken care of in the process, etc., etc. So internal or making sure internal succession is not particularly crucial to that retiring principal, but what he wants to make sure is whatever he does, his number two is looked after. I get that. So what I'm trying to do is help them facilitate a sale. It's not going to be an internal succession because the number two doesn't particularly want, I don't think, to take the business on, doesn't feel particularly well equipped to do it, etc. But what I'm helping them do is negotiate a sale to an external party that will give the number two a capital event of their own at some point in the future. That's another option. But if I'm really then wedded to internal succession, I've got to maybe adjust my expectations. Maybe I've got to push the time frame out a bit to get to the right number, or maybe I just scale back on my number. Internal succession was always my point. The number was subsidiary to that. I appreciate that might be a very definite minority view. But if that number looks feasible as a result of the feasibility study and taking a bit of advice, and then you're looking at your firm, okay, well, maybe I need to make a bit more profit. Well, there's two ways to make profit. Can I reduce my costs? Can I increase my top line? You're beginning to build the bones of a business plan. You can't formulate a properly detailed business plan until your internal success is being brought into this, but you're doing a feasibility study. Other parts of that feasibility study would be, for example, what am I doing around this place that's really quite important? Is there anybody else working in this firm who can take this role on? If there isn't, that doesn't rule out an internal succession, but what it means is you've got to go and find someone to come in. That might then probably almost certainly will shift your time frame back. So you're looking at this, you're looking at systems and processes, you're looking at, coming back to funding. Okay, well, how is this going to be paid for? Because again, there are three routes: company profits, people subscribing for shares, or external finance, one way or another. And probably if it's internal succession, you're looking at debt because you don't want to bring anybody else into equity that hasn't, bought in and works for the firm. So you're sort of putting all your thoughts together. And then if you think, as a result of your feasibility study, this all meets in the middle, then what you will have, because you've gone through this thinking yourself, is the bones of a proposition to put to your internal succession. Now, Stuart and I were in a really quite fortunate position because we built a proper business plan because, boring on about my past, I'm a proper chartered accountant. We had a proper business plan, and I said to you on our previous chat, one thing I did was I put that business plan out on a table and I said to Steve and Chris, right, now let's have a chat about this. I brought them into our confidence. I wouldn't expect them to go for a sort of woolly promise of we're going to bring you into equity. In order to get that buy-in, it was incumbent on me to say, right, this is the thing that I'm going to offer you to the opportunity to buy into. This is why we need you. This is how I see this going if we put it all together. So my business plan was looking forwards really in detail about 5 years. Well, looking forward in huge detail over a year and a bit less detail over 5 years. Anyway, you get the gist. At that point, I'm bringing people into my confidence. And the crucial point there is I've got to be pretty confident at that stage, because probably the worst thing you can do is bring somebody into these discussions and build up their hopes and expectations and then dash them. So if I'm not going to go through with this, if I'm not 100% committed, I'm not going to discuss it with anybody else. And I'm not saying I'm 100% sure this is going to happen, because we're going to have to talk. I've got to find an internal succession who's happy to buy in, etc. But what I am saying is, from my side of the fence, I'm 100% committed in principle, which is why I'm talking to you. I have talked over the last year to, I don't know how many chartered financial planners who have told me it's great, you actually delivered on this promise to bring people into equity. Well, of course I did, but the first two in had to take that on trust. But quite a lot of people have said to me, we were promised equity, and I know two particularly who've sort of said, we were promised it on this basis. If we delivered this, this and this, we'd be brought in. Both of them are now thinking that was just a ploy, because the principals involved are talking to external buyers, and these number twos, for want of a better word, are now feeling we really had the mickey taken out of us. We went into this heart and soul. There can't be any contracts on this, because the shares cannot be a benefit of the employment, etc. But they feel extreme, not even disillusioned is putting it mildly. They are infuriated, and I would be. I've only got their side of the story, but it's pretty clear to me they were sold a pretty solid promise that has just turned out to be smoke and mirrors. So you've got to be 100% committed before you bring somebody else in, because if you think that through logically, if I build somebody's hopes up and I don't go through with this, how are they going to feel? Most of the guys who tell me they think they've been let down in this way are obviously looking for alternative employment. We could do a deal on that. I could give you a list of names. I'll promise confidentiality. Of course, I'll promise some confidentiality, but I can tell you there are quite a number of very promising, very well qualified, very bright people out there who feel they have been let down, or even worse, had the mickey taken out of them. These are people where I say, okay, well, why don't you talk to you? You talk to you.
Collaboration piece, yeah.
So, and then once you've got somebody, an internal successor who says, yeah, I love the idea of that, then you can move things forward and you can begin to manage expectations, because you're going to tell them at that point, this is the end game. That point in time, I'm expecting broadly this amount of money. But that's not a figure plucked out of the air. This is how I've derived that figure. This is why I think it's reasonable. Now, what do you think about that? And then let's us two get together and start building this firm towards that end point that it needs to be at that particular point in time. And what you find, if you collaborate with the wrong people, it's obviously worse than not collaborating at all. But if you collaborate with the right people, and bear in mind, you've now made effectively a promise to this person that so many young chartered financial planners would really like to get, they are going to be so motivated. But what you should do is, once you've brought them into this, the first thing that you do is you ask them to put real skin on the table. Okay, and I'm a massive believer in this. We did it with Steve and Chris. I'm going to show real commitment to this. I'm going to let you buy in to this extent. That's the amount of money I want. As soon as they put money in, they are now on your side of the table. They are a shareholder.
To test that, isn't it? Because if
It's
they
an
backed out, they're not right.
If they backed out, they're not right. And if you don't offer it, are you right? So that's a very early stage. You know, they are now no longer an employee. They are sitting on your side of the table. They are a shareholder. They might be a relatively small shareholder, but they are still a shareholder, and you cannot ride roughshod over them. You know, you still hold all the cards, obviously you do. But if you've got any sense about you will do that, because you've now got someone whose interests are 100% aligned with yours. If they want to get their money back, they are now going to have to work as a shareholder would and carry on building the firm. But sensibly, what you'd also do when you identify your internal successor or successors, you know, it needn't be one person, the more the merrier as far as I'm concerned, within reason. What you now should be doing is sharing decision making. You should be properly boxing off that business plan. Right, here we are today, that's where we want to be by that point in time, this is the path. Which bits are you going to take responsibility for, which bits am I going to deal with? And you know, your initial feasibility study should have shown up things like strengths and weaknesses. You know, what extra training and mentoring do you need over this period? Because I'm saying, you know, you don't get this over the line in 6 weeks.
It's a massive piece, isn't it? Yeah.
We were.
Is this all contained in your paper?
Broadly. Well, you read it, James. Go home tonight and read it, and you'll.
I'm on page 23.
Yeah, well, I can't remember how many pages.
117 pages.
Is it 117? It's gone up a bit. I thought it was 115.
Well, that's including contents and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, as I say, some of it might be a bit long-winded, but excuse that because it was all written off the cuff.
But we are coming to the end of the podcast. So I'm just looking at time.
But it's all in there. It's all in there.
Yeah. So if people want to take a read,
and what I'm trying to do there is say that was what was in my head when I went on this journey with Stuart.
And if we will promote this for you, because last time we did this with your business plan, we had over 200 and well over 200 people download it. So we'll do the same, but you're looking for a contribution to a charity.
I mean, what I think is, I sort of think that document should be quite useful to people who are thinking like this. So, I mean, I've got it on a little website I put up. I don't want to make any money out of this. This is just part of my gesture. But I did put quite a lot of time and effort into that, and I do think it's got some valuable intellect. Might be a bit of a strong word, but there is some detailed thought in there. So what I say to people is, if you read it and you think it's useful, I'll be really grateful if you donate to a couple of charities. Those 2 charities are the Williams Syndrome Foundation, which I'm a trustee of, and another charity based. Well, it's a national charity called Brainwave, which looks after kids with really anything from quite mild learning difficulties to really quite serious ones. And I think both of them do a really good job. And so I'll give you the links.
Give me the links.
You know, you can donate to those pages, to those 2 charities through their website. So I'll give you the links.
Well, we will happily support that, and we'll happily distribute this to people. And honesty box, isn't it? It's down to them to do it if they feel.
Yeah, I mean, there is another one. Actually, it's not quite a charity yet. This is one I put a post up on about a month ago. Another little project which is very local to me called the Strawberry Line. I can't really ask for donations for that yet because it is not quite a charity. It's a community interest company, and I am working with them to get this converted into a charity. But the Strawberry Line, it provides employment opportunity for people like my son, and he is actually employed there in a very small part-time way. provides opportunities for people with learning difficulties mainly, but also some physical difficulties. And also through our Cycle Hire project, we do some really, really good work with not just kids with physical difficulties and learning difficulties, but also some kids who have been seriously quite disadvantaged. So if you gave anything to the Strawberry Line, it wouldn't be a charitable donation at this stage because it's not a charity yet. But that one, actually, I am just beginning to get to grips with the finances of it. It really could do with a few bob to get it through the winter, because obviously our Cycle Hire project is much more popular over the summer than it is when it's chucking it down.
Well, we've got
those are the three.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely support that. I think that brings us to a natural conclusion to our podcast. This is the trilogy that no one ever thought would ever happen, including me.
Well, probably some people think it'll never stop, James.
No. But I think what I would say is we've had how you got into the industry. We've had how you've built a successful business.
How am I going into the what? Sorry.
So we've done the start. How you got into the industry.
Into the.
Oh, I've done it again. Well, it was an industry back then.
Well, it was actually. Yeah, technically, you're right. I'll give you that. I'll give you that. Yes.
So you got into the industry, which then changed into a profession.
Let's say that. Yeah. I got into an industry and I exited a profession.
There we go.
Like that.
There we go. That's quite a nice ending. Anyway, a few words from me. What I'd like to say is thank you very much for your time over these past couple of months. It's been brilliant. You know, I've learned. I've got to know you very well. You're certainly not a grump. I think you are a man of conviction and a man of principle, and I do think we need more people like that because it's important. I don't always agree with your tactics, but at least I know why you say the things that you do. So it's been a pleasure for me to listen and learn. You know, I always do these podcasts from an audience of one who I find interesting. So I've learned a lot from you within the profession, actually, because I run a business as well. So there's some good principles. So what I have got you, Dave, is a gift. All right?
Really?
No, lower your expectations.
Is it ticking?
It's nicely wrapped in cellophane. So I thought, how do we end this podcast, this series? So I thought I listened to some of the comments that would be made throughout the podcast, some of the themes, and I thought I'll get a T-shirt for you. And it's not that inflammatory. It could have been a lot worse. I've got history.
Good job you designed it.
Yeah. So I've got you this, Dave. You'll like this.
Are we going to show it to the cameras?
We are going to show it to the camera. If you can see that, there we go. No conflicts allowed.
I quite like that.
That's all right, isn't it? I tried to get a bumper sticker, but I couldn't get it done in time. So I think
we can have another one, James, on the definition of conflict. But no, I like that.
There you go. You can. I think that sums up you.
Oh, thank you very much.
No conflict allowed.
I wonder if it'll fit.
There you go. I was going to get you a MAGA hat. Make advice great again. But
what size is it?
It'll fit. Yeah. So, Dave, thank you very much for your time. It's been brilliant. You've been a brilliant guest.
I've really enjoyed it, James.
We'll do it again as well.
I've really enjoyed it. And, you know, seriously, thanks for the opportunity, because I do think, as you say, it is a far easier way to get a point across than ranting on a little bit in type. On LinkedIn. So no, thanks for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And I've really enjoyed my trips up to Yorkshire.
Good.
Again.
Well, we'll see you again.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'll be up here in a motorhome again.
Cheers, Dave.
Cheers. Thanks, James. Thank you very much.